What if the person you dismissed as invisible, the one you treated as nothing more than an obstacle in your path, was secretly the one who held your entire world in their hands? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the deceptive nature of power and the quiet strength of those we overlook. It's about a waitress named Clara Evans, whose worn-out shoes and tired smile concealed a secret that was about to bring the city's most arrogant billionaire, Damian Sterling, to his knees. It's a reminder that karma doesn't always send a warning, and sometimes the bill comes due in the most unexpected way imaginable. Stay with us to hear how a single glass of spilled wine in a high-end restaurant triggered the collapse of an empire. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theatre. Every night the same play was performed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The actors were the city's elite, the tech moguls, the banking scions, the old money matriarchs, and the stagehands were people like Clara Evans. Her role was simple: be swift, be silent, and above all, be invisible. At 28, Clara wore her waitress uniform like a second skin. It was a well-tailored but drab grey dress, a canvas onto which the wealthy patrons could project their own importance. She had learned the geography of this world intimately, the precise angle to pour the Chateau Margaux to avoid a single drop marring the white linen, the exact moment to clear a plate without interrupting the flow of a multi-million-dollar conversation, and the carefully neutral expression to maintain when a dismissive hand was waved in her face. Clara wasn't born into this life of servitude. In fact, her life had been a quiet academic one. She'd graduated with a degree in art history, dreaming of curating galleries and preserving beauty. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. A family illness had drained her savings, and her father's death a year ago had left her unmoored adrift in a sea of debt and grief. The Gilded Sparrow, with its lucrative tips, was a life raft. It was meant to be temporary, a stopgap, until she could find her footing again. But months had bled into 2 years, and the apron strings felt more like chains every day. Her colleagues saw her as quiet and efficient. They knew she was smart. She'd sometimes help their kids with homework, questions they couldn't answer, but they assumed her past was as unremarkable as her present. No one knew about the worn copy of Proust in her locker, or the sketches of Renaissance architecture she drew on napkins during her break. To them she was just Clara, reliable, steady, forgettable. This particular Tuesday evening was no different. The air hummed with the low thrum of expensive chatter. Clara moved between tables with a practiced grace, her mind a whirlwind of orders, allergies, and special requests. Table 7 needed more bread. Table 12's steak was to be butterfly cut medium well, a culinary sin she was paid not to judge. Her manager Marcus, a perpetually stressed man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, pulled her aside near the service station. Clara, table 3. It's Damian Sterling. You know the drill. Clara's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the drill with Mr. Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Prescott Holdings, a massive luxury goods conglomerate that owned everything from boutique hotels to high-fashion labels. He was a titan of industry, a regular fixture in Forbes, and notoriously the worst customer in the city. He treated service staff like dirt beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes. The unspoken rule was to give him what he wanted before he knew he wanted it, and never ever make a mistake. He's with the board from a Japanese firm they're trying to acquire. High stakes, Marcus whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. Just be perfect. Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course, Marcus. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. Damian Sterling sat at the head holding court. He was exactly as his public image suggested, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, a ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist, and a look of bored arrogance etched onto his handsome face. He wasn't speaking. He was pontificating his voice, a smooth, confident baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. His guests, 3 impeccably dressed Japanese businessmen and a younger, nervous-looking associate, listened with rapt attention. "The market waits for no one," Sterling was saying, gesturing with a hand that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor. Sentimentality legacy. These are anchors. You cut them loose or you sink. Clara waited for a pause that never came. Finally, she stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Gentlemen, may I offer you an aperitif while you look over the menu?" Sterling didn't even look at her. He simply raised one finger, a gesture that said, "Wait." Clara froze, her body held in a state of suspended service, a living statue in a grey dress. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. She wasn't a person to him. She was an interruption. After finishing his point with a self-satisfied smirk, he finally turned his head, his cold blue eyes scanning her from head to toe with a look of utter disinterest. "We'll start with a bottle of the 82 Petrus," he said, his tone suggesting he was ordering a soda. He hadn't glanced at the wine list. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who knew the most expensive thing on it by heart. "An excellent choice," Sir Clara replied, her voice professionally placid. He waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his guests. "Just bring it." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could feel his presence like a physical weight on the entire room. He was a black hole of ego, pulling all light and energy towards himself. She thought of her father, Arthur. He had been a businessman too, a small-scale builder who knew every one of his employees by name. He believed a company was a family, that its foundation was respect. Men like Damien Sterling were everything her father had despised. They built empires on the backs of invisible people, never once thinking to look down. Little did she know her father's world and Damien Sterling's were about to collide with her standing at the epicenter. And in her locker next to the copy of Proust was a thick manila envelope from a law firm, an envelope she hadn't yet found the courage to open. The 82 Petrus was stored in the deep cellar, a hallowed space where bottles worth more than Clara's car rested in silent, temperature-controlled reverence. She retrieved it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. The bottle was cool and heavy in her hands, a vessel of fermented history. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it tasted like, this nectar of the gods that men like Sterling consumed so casually. Returning to the table, she presented the bottle to him as protocol dictated. Again, he didn't look at her, merely grunting his approval. Clara began the delicate ritual of opening the wine. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying sigh. She poured a small amount into a decanter, the deep, ruby liquid swirling like liquid velvet. Then she poured a tasting measure into Sterling's glass. He picked it up, swirled it with an air of practiced connoisseurship, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a moment, before swallowing. "Fine," he declared, not to her, but to the table at large, as if the wine had simply materialized in his glass. Clara began to pour for his guests. She moved with practiced economical movements, her focus entirely on the task. She served the Japanese businessman first, her hands steady, her presence unobtrusive. As she moved around the table to pour for Sterling's young associate, a man named Peterson, he shifted suddenly in his seat, nervously adjusting his tie. His elbow jutted out, knocking Clara's arm just as she was tilting the decanter. Time seemed to slow down. The heavy crystal decanter slipped from her grasp, and the world became a tableau of impending disaster. She saw the dark red cascade of wine, a beautiful, terrible arc through the air. It didn't land on the table. It didn't land on the floor. It landed squarely on the front of Damien Sterling's crisp white $1,000 shirt. Silence. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked out of the room. All conversation at the surrounding tables ceased. Every eye in the Gilded Sparrow was on table 3. The wine spread across Sterling's shirt like a grotesque blooming flower. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her professional composure shattered. "It was an accident. Before she could finish, Damien Sterling rose slowly from his chair. His face, moments before a mask of casual arrogance, was now a thundercloud of pure fury. His blue eyes, once cold, were now blazing. He looked down at the crimson stain on his chest, then up at her. He didn't shout. His voice, when it came, was low, controlled, and infinitely more terrifying than any yell. An accident, he hissed each word, a venomous dart. "Do you have any idea what this shirt costs? It costs more than you make in a month. But that's not the point, is it?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. She could smell the expensive cologne, the wine on his breath. "The point," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "is incompetence. The point is that I come here to conduct business, to entertain important partners, and I am subjected to this clumsiness." He gestured vaguely at her, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. His associate Peterson was pale with terror. "Sir, it was my fault. I moved my arm. Quiet, Peterson," Sterling snapped without looking at him. His laser focus was entirely on Clara. "People like you," he said to her, his voice dropping even lower, "are supposed to be invisible. You are background. You are furniture that moves. Your one job is not to screw up, and you can't even do that. What is your name?" Clara's throat was dry. "Clara, sir." He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Clara, of course. A name as forgettable as your face." He leaned in his voice, a conspiratorial whisper that everyone at the table could hear. "Let me give you a piece of life advice, Clara. Some people are born to lead, to create, to matter. And some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place. You are utterly and completely insignificant." The words struck her harder than a physical blow. It wasn't just the anger. It was the casual cruelty, the deep-seated belief behind his words. He genuinely saw her as a lesser being. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. She could feel the stares of every person in the restaurant burning into her back. Marcus was now rushing over his face, a mask of frantic apology. "Mr. Sterling, I am terribly, terribly sorry. On behalf of the Gilded Sparrow, please, this entire meal is on us, and this employee will be dealt with immediately." Sterling shot Marcus a look that could curdle milk. "See that she is." He then turned to his Japanese guests, his demeanor shifting instantly back to one of oily charm, though his rage still simmered just beneath the surface. "Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies for this unfortunate interruption. A minor domestic disturbance. Please allow me to arrange for a private room where we can continue our discussion away from the help." He threw one last look of disgust at Clara, a look that said, "You are nothing," before striding away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen, the shattered remains of the decanter at her feet. The deep red wine pooled on the floor, looking unnervingly like blood. At that moment, something inside her shifted. The shame was still there, but beneath it, a different emotion began to smolder. It was a cold, hard ember of anger. Insignificant. Forgettable. Furniture that moves. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had cared for a dying mother, the hands that sketched buildings and paid bills. They were capable hands. She was not nothing. As Marcus began to gently guide her away from the scene, her mind went back to the unopened envelope in her locker. It was from the firm of Finch, Covington and Dunn, the executors of her late father's estate. She had been putting off opening it, afraid of what legal complexities and final goodbyes it might contain. But now Damien Sterling's cruel words echoed in her mind, and a new resolve took root. She would not be insignificant, and she had a sudden, powerful feeling that whatever was in that envelope was about to change everything. The walk to the staff locker room felt like a mile-long march of shame. The whispers of her colleagues, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, followed her. Marcus was surprisingly gentle. He didn't fire her on the spot as she'd expected. "Take the rest of the night off, Clara," he said softly, handing her a glass of water. "Go home, we'll talk tomorrow." He knew a lawsuit for wrongful termination was the last thing the restaurant needed after a scene with a man like Sterling. But Clara didn't go home. She sank onto the hard bench in the locker room, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her hands trembling. Sterling's words played on a loop in her head. "Some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place." Her eyes fell on her locker, on the envelope. With a newfound urgency, she fumbled with the lock, her shaking fingers struggling with the combination. She pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. The embossed logo of Finch, Covington and Dunn seemed to stare up at her with an air of immense gravity. Her father, Arthur Prescott, had always used this firm. He had trusted one of the senior partners, Alistair Finch, implicitly. She tore it open. Inside was a letter several pages long, written on heavy bond paper, and a smaller sealed envelope, marked, "For Clara in my own hand." She unfolded the official letter first. The legalese was dense, but the core message was shockingly clear. It spoke of trusts of holding companies and of share structures so complex they made her head spin. Her father, a man she'd always thought of as a successful but modest builder, had been far more. The small company she knew, Prescott Construction, was merely the sentimental heart of a much larger and far wealthier entity. Years ago, seeking to expand, Arthur Prescott had entered into a partnership, forming a holding company to acquire and manage other businesses. The name of that holding company was Sterling Prescott Holdings. Clara read the sentence again and again. A cold dread mingled with a dawning, terrifying sense of disbelief washed over her. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel joke by the universe. But there was no mistake. The letter detailed how her father, Arthur Prescott, had been the majority shareholder. He had retained 51% of the voting shares, a controlling interest he had never relinquished. His partner, a young, ambitious executive named Damien Sterling, controlled the other 49%. After Arthur's health had begun to fail, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, ceding the role of CEO to Sterling under a strict contractual agreement. But he had always remained the quiet, guiding force, the true owner. And then came the final earth-shattering paragraph. As per the unalterable terms of the primary trust established by Mr. Arthur Prescott upon his death, his entire controlling interest of 51% in Sterling Prescott Holdings, along with all associated assets, passes directly and wholly to his sole heir, his daughter, Clara Annalise Evans. She was no longer Clara Evans. In the eyes of the law, she was Clara Prescott. She had used her mother's maiden name after her parents' divorce to give herself a sense of independence, a choice her father had always respected. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared at the grimy linoleum, her mind a blank slate of shock. Damien Sterling, the man who had just called her insignificant, forgettable furniture. The man who ran his company with an iron fist and a contempt for the little people. He wasn't the owner, he was an employee. And she, Clara, the clumsy waitress, was his new boss. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absurd, that she almost laughed. It was a hollow, breathless sound in the empty locker room. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it had a taste for brutal, poetic justice. Her hands, no longer shaking, reached for the second envelope. Her father's familiar, strong handwriting was a comfort and a pain. She opened it. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my time is over. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you are not alone. I have so many regrets, my girl. The biggest is that I didn't tell you the full truth of my life's work. I kept it from you to protect you, to allow you to find your own path without the weight of my legacy. I see now that this may have been a mistake. It was pride. I wanted you to be an art historian, not a businesswoman. But the company is yours now. It is your burden and your opportunity. It was built on a simple principle that quality and integrity matter more than profit, and that the people who work for you are your greatest asset, not lines on a spreadsheet. I fear my partner Damien has forgotten this. He is brilliant, but he lacks a heart. He sees the world in numbers, not in people. Do with this inheritance what you will, my love. Sell it, run it, or burn it to the ground. It is yours. But I ask one thing of you before you make your decision. Look. Truly look. Understand what it is you now own. Understand the people whose livelihoods depend on it. My lawyer, Alistair Finch, will help you. He is the only man I ever trusted more than myself. Be strong, be wise, but most of all be the good and kind woman I always knew you were. All my love, forever dad tears, streamed down Clara's face, hot and silent. They were tears of grief for her father, but also tears of a strange, terrifying clarity. His final words were a call to action. Look. Truly look. She looked at her reflection in the small locker mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly askew. She was still wearing the drab grey uniform of the Gilded Sparrow, but when she looked into her own eyes, she saw something new. The smouldering ember of anger had been fanned into a flame. It was no longer just about the personal humiliation. It was about her father's legacy. Damien Sterling, the man who preached about cutting away sentimentality and legacy, was actively destroying the very principles upon which her company was built. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and terrifying. She would not march into the Sterling Prescott headquarters tomorrow and announce herself. He wouldn't respect her. He would see the waitress and fight her with every legal and corporate weapon he had. He had to be shown, not told. He needed to be undone by the very thing he despised, the insignificant person he never saw coming. She would follow her father's advice. She would look. She would stay right where she was in the shadows. She would be Clara, the waitress. She would watch, she would listen, and she would learn. And when the time was right, the furniture would stand up, and Damien Sterling would finally know her name. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch. She said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with a steel she didn't know she possessed. This is Clara Prescott. We need to talk, and we need to be discreet. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Clara was a ghost in the corporate machine of Sterling Prescott Holdings. By night, she was a ghost in the dining room of the Gilded Sparrow. Her meeting with Alistair Finch had been a revelation. He was an older gentleman, with kind eyes that held a lawyer's shrewd intelligence. He had been expecting her call. He treated her not as a grieving daughter or a bewildered waitress, but as the rightful owner of a billion-dollar enterprise. "Your father was a brilliant man," Ms. Prescott Finch had said, sitting opposite her in his stately wood-panelled office. He saw Damien Sterling's ambition and his ruthlessness. He hoped to temper it with his own philosophy, but he also put safeguards in place. "Your 51% ownership is ironclad. The board can advise, but they cannot overrule you. You are, for all intents and purposes, the queen on the chessboard." Clara, who felt more like a pawn, outlined her plan. She didn't want to just take over. She wanted to understand the company from the inside out. She wanted to see the rot that Damien had introduced. Finch had smiled. An undercover boss. Very unorthodox. Your father would have admired your audacity. He became her guide, her cue to her James Bond. He granted her top-level anonymous access to the company's servers. From a cheap laptop in her small apartment, Clara logged in under a pseudonym A. Prescott began to dig. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Her father's company, once known for its craftsmanship and employee loyalty, was being systematically hollowed out. She started with the financials. Profits were up, astronomically so, but the methods were brutal. Damien had outsourced manufacturing for their signature leather goods line to overseas factories with questionable labor practices, replacing skilled artisans who had been with the company for decades. The quality had dipped a fact, hidden by an aggressive marketing campaign. Then she found the personnel files. She saw a pattern of corporate restructuring that targeted older, higher-paid employees, replacing them with younger, cheaper staff. The pension fund had been restructured to minimize company contributions. The most damning discovery was a file labeled AP Legacy Fund. It was a philanthropic initiative. Her father had started a fund that provided scholarships for the children of employees and emergency financial aid for families in crisis. It was his heart and soul codified. Under Damien's leadership, the fund had been quietly drained, its capital reallocated to cover executive bonuses and marketing overages. He was literally taking money from the families of his workers to pad his own pockets and sell a lie of superior quality. The anger she had felt in the restaurant now had a target. It wasn't just about his personal insult to her. It was about his systemic betrayal of thousands of people of her father's entire life's work. During the day, she devoured reports and spreadsheets. She learned the names of the board members: Evelyn Reed, the razor-sharp CFO, who was fiercely loyal to Damien; George Hammond, an old friend of her father's, who had been increasingly marginalized; and two others who seemed to vote whichever way the wind of power was blowing. At night, she would put on her grey uniform and return to the Gilded Sparrow. Marcus had been relieved when she'd shown up for her next shift, apologizing profusely and offering to keep her away from the main dining room. But Clara had insisted. "I'm fine, Marcus," she'd said. "I need the money." Working there was now a surreal experience. She would serve men and women who unknowingly sat on the board of her own company. She listened to their conversations, piecing together the corporate power dynamics from snippets of overheard gossip. She learned that George Hammond was deeply unhappy with the company's direction, and that Evelyn Reed was Damien's enforcer, feared by all. One evening, George Hammond came in for dinner alone. He looked tired and defeated. Clara was assigned his table. He was polite, but distracted. "Is everything all right?" Sir Clara asked, as she refilled his water. He looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. "It's a long story, young lady. Have you ever felt like you're watching something you helped build get torn down brick by brick?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I think I know the feeling," she said, her voice soft. This place used to stand for something. He mumbled more to himself than to her. Arthur Prescott. He was a good man. He believed in building things to last. Now, it's all just about the next quarter. The soul is gone. The conversation was a small spark of hope. She had an ally, even if he didn't know it yet. Her most nerve-wracking nights were when Damien Sterling returned. He came in twice more during those 2 weeks. He never once recognized her. To him, she was just another part of the scenery. The first time, he was with a glamorous model and ignored Clara so completely it was as if she were a ghost. The second time was different. He was meeting with a journalist for a puff piece. Clara watched him spin a web of lies, speaking passionately about Sterling Prescott's commitment to artisanal quality and employee empowerment. He even mentioned the Prescott Legacy Fund as one of his key initiatives, describing it as thriving. Clara had to grip the serving tray so tightly her knuckles turned white to keep from shouting right there in the middle of the restaurant. He was using her father's memory as a marketing tool while simultaneously desecrating it. That was the moment her plan crystallized. It wasn't enough to expose him. It wasn't enough to fire him. She had to dismantle his entire false reality in front of the very people whose respect he craved. She needed a stage, and she knew just the one. She called Alistair Finch the next morning. "Mr. Finch, when is the next quarterly board meeting?" "Next Friday the 24th, he replied. "Damien is set to announce record-breaking profits. He's planning to propose a massive stock buyback that will net him a personal bonus of over $20 million. "Perfect," Clara said, a cold calm settling over her. "Please send an anonymous message to the board. Inform them that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance to observe the proceedings." "A representative?" Finch asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Yes," Clara replied, looking at her reflection. She wasn't a waitress or a ghost anymore. "Tell them the majority shareholder is sending someone to protect her interests. Let him sweat for a week. Let him wonder who is coming for his crown." The game was on. The anonymous email from Finch, Covington and Dunn landed in the inboxes of the Sterling Prescott board members like a perfectly timed grenade. It was brief, professional, and utterly destabilizing. "To the board of directors of Sterling Prescott Holdings, please be advised that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance at the quarterly meeting on October the 24th. The representative will be acting with the full authority of the majority shareholder to observe the proceedings and ensure her interests are being properly represented. Sincerely, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner, Finch, Covington and Dunn." The ripple effects were immediate. Clara, monitoring internal communications through her back-channel access, watched the panic unfold. Damien Sterling, who ruled his domain with absolute certainty, was suddenly faced with an unknown variable. The Prescott estate had been silent for a year. A sleeping giant he had likely assumed would stay asleep forever. The heir and unknown daughter he'd never bothered to track down was a non-entity in his mind. Now this ghost was sending a proxy. His emails to Evelyn Reed, the CFO, were frantic and demanding. "Who is this? What do they want? Did Finch give you any names? Is it a bank? A trust manager?" Evelyn's replies were clipped and efficient, but Clara could read the underlying tension. "Finch is a locked box, Damien. He said only that the representatives would make themselves known at the meeting." Damien's paranoia went into overdrive. He ordered a complete audit of all departmental reports, demanding that every number be triple-checked. He scheduled extra prep meetings, grilling his vice presidents until they were pale with exhaustion. He was a man trying to find a crack in his own fortress, terrified that someone else had already found it. Clara saw her chance to subtly test the waters. Working with Finch, She had him send a single follow-up query to George Hammond, the old board member who had lamented the company's direction. The query was simple. The Prescott estate has concerns regarding the dissolution of the AP Legacy Fund. Can you provide any context? The response was telling. George Hammond wrote back a long, heartfelt email detailing his objections to the fund's closure and his failed attempts to argue for its preservation. He attached the original meeting minutes where Damien had railroaded the decision through framing it as a necessary fiscal consolidation. In contrast, when Finch sent the same query to Evelyn Reed, her response was a single, cold sentence. All fiscal reallocations were approved by the board and are in full compliance with corporate bylaws. The battle lines were being drawn before the first shot was even fired. Meanwhile, Clara's life at the Gilded Sparrow continued. She was now a spy in plain sight. One evening, just 3 days before the board meeting, Damien Sterling came in with Evelyn Reed for a strategy dinner. They chose a secluded booth, but not secluded enough for Clara, who made sure she was the one assigned to their section. She approached the table notepad in hand, her face a perfect mask of professional deference. "Good evening." "May I get you something to drink?" Damien didn't even look up from the papers spread across the table. "Scotch. Macallan, 25. "Neat." Evelyn Reed, however, did look up. Her sharp, intelligent eyes lingered on Clara for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a look Clara had seen before from powerful people, a quick, dismissive scan to categorize and file away. Waitress. Unimportant. Move on. The moment passed, and she ordered sparkling water. For the next 2 hours, Clara served them refilling drinks, delivering their food, and listening to every word. Their conversation was a chilling window into their worldview. The Prescott ghost is spooking the street. Damien grumbled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We need to present a united front. The numbers are undeniable. Profit is the only thing that matters. This representative, whoever he is, will be a bean counter from a bank. Show him the money and he'll crawl back into his hole." And Hammond Evelyn asked, her voice low. "George is a dinosaur," Damien sneered. "He's still living in the era of company picnics and gold watches. He'll make some sentimental speech about Arthur's vision. I'll let him, and then we'll vote him down." As always. Clara felt a fresh wave of cold fury. They were so certain, so arrogant in their private bubble of power. But it was Damien's next words that truly cemented her resolve. Evelyn pushed a file towards him. "This is the final proposal for the V-Series handbag line. It involves closing the last domestic workshop in Ohio. We'll be laying off the remaining 60 artisans. It will increase our profit margin by another 4%. Damien barely glanced at it. "Do it. They're overpaid anyway. Any skilled worker who thinks they're irreplaceable in a global economy is a fool. They're cogs in a machine, and cogs can be replaced." He took a long sip of his scotch. "Sentiment is a liability." Clara stood by the service station, polishing a wine glass her back to them. Cogs in a machine. The phrase echoed in her mind. Her father had known the names of the men and women in that Ohio workshop. He had called them artists. She walked back to their table to clear the dessert plates. As she reached for Damien's empty plate, he looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes met hers. For a second, there was a flicker of something, a vague, misplaced sense of familiarity. He had seen her face before, recently. But where? The restaurant, another one. 1,000 different service people passed through his life. They were all a blur. He frowned, then dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. He waved a hand at her. "Just the check." As Clara ran his credit card, she looked at the name, embossed on the platinum plastic, Damien Sterling. Below it, in smaller letters, CEO Sterling Prescott Holdings. She handed the receipt back to him. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Have a good evening." Her voice was steady, her expression neutral. But inside she was making a vow. He would not close that workshop. He would not lay off those artisans. He would not win. He thought he was playing chess with a ghost, a faceless representative from a law firm. He had no idea he was sitting 3 feet away from the Queen, and she was about to checkmate him. The morning of October 24th dawned grey, and overcast the sky, a blanket of steel over the city. Clara woke before sunrise. There was no waitress uniform laid out for her today. Instead, hanging on the back of her bedroom door was an outfit she had purchased with the last of her own money, a deliberate choice. It was a simple, elegant, dark charcoal pantsuit. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfectly tailored. It spoke of seriousness and authority, not wealth. It was a uniform of a different kind. She showered and got dressed, the unfamiliar fabric feeling strange against her skin. This was armor. As she styled her hair into a simple professional bun, she looked at herself in the mirror. The tired, harried waitress was gone. The woman looking back at her was someone else. Her eyes were clear and focused, holding a quiet intensity. The weeks of digging, listening, and planning had forged a new confidence in her. She was no longer just Arthur Prescott's daughter. She was the guardian of his legacy. A car sent by Alistair Finch was waiting for her downstairs. She spent the ride to the Sterling Prescott Tower, going over her notes one last time. It was a formidable stack of financial reports, highlighting the disparity between rising profits and declining quality damning internal emails, a detailed analysis of the gutted legacy fund, and most importantly, a list of names. The names of the artisans in the Ohio workshop. The names of the long-term employees who had been forced into early retirement. The names of the children whose scholarships had vanished. She wouldn't just be fighting with numbers. She would be fighting with lives. Alistair Finch was waiting for her in the marble and glass lobby. He looked her up and down, a proud, fatherly smile on his face. "Arthur would be so incredibly proud of you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope I can do right by him," she replied, her own voice steady. "You have the truth on your side. In my experience, that is the most powerful weapon in any room." He handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything is in order. You are legally and officially recognized as the majority shareholder. When you speak with the full weight of the Prescott estate." They rode the silent high-speed elevator to the 40th floor where the boardroom was located. As the doors opened, they stepped into a hushed, opulent reception area. A nervous-looking executive assistant hurried towards them. "Mr. Finch, welcome. We were expecting you." The assistant's eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of confusion in her expression. She was clearly expecting an older man, a banker or a lawyer, not this poised young woman. "The meeting is about to begin," Finch said smoothly. "We won't be late." He gestured for Clara to walk ahead. The doors to the boardroom were massive, carved from dark mahogany. Clara took one final deep breath and pushed them open. The room was exactly as she'd pictured it, a long, polished table reflecting the grey sky, outside high-backed leather chairs, and the faint, expensive scent of power. The board members were all there, seated. At the head of the table, looking impatient and imperious, was Damien Sterling. He looked up as they entered his eyes, immediately locking on Alistair Finch. A look of strained cordiality settled on his face. "Alistair, good of you to come," he said, rising from his chair. "We were just about to start. You must be the representative from the estate." His gaze then slid to Clara, standing just behind Finch. He didn't recognize her, not even a glimmer. In his mind, the context was so utterly impossible that his brain simply didn't make the connection. She was a lawyer's assistant, a junior associate. Furniture, and this is your, he asked, trailing off with a dismissive wave in her direction. Alistair Finch stepped to the side, a subtle, deliberate movement that left Clara standing alone in the full view of the entire board. Mr. Sterling, members of the board, Finch began his voice, resonating with quiet authority. I am here today only in an advisory capacity. The representative of the Prescott estate, the sole heir and majority shareholder of this company, is here to speak for herself. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. Allow me to introduce you all to Ms. Clara Prescott. The name Prescott hit the room first. George Hammond's eyes widened in surprise. Evelyn Reed's perfectly composed face tightened almost imperceptibly. But Damien Sterling was still processing. He stared at Clara, a deep frown creasing his brow. The name was familiar, of course, but the face was still just a nagging, unimportant whisper in the back of his mind. He had seen her somewhere. A restaurant, a gala. It didn't matter. Clara met his gaze directly. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her expression was calm, her eyes like chips of ice. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to truly look at her, to see past the pantsuit, past the boardroom, back to a Tuesday night of spilled wine and shattered glass. And then she saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the dawning, horrified recognition. His mouth fell slightly open. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The CEO, the titan of industry, looked as if he had just seen a ghost. Clara gave him a small, cold smile. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. We've met before. You said I had a forgettable face. She pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, her father's chair, and sat down, placing her portfolio gently on the polished surface. Let's begin. The boardroom was trapped in a state of suspended animation. The ticking of the large clock on the wall sounded like a hammer, striking an anvil. George Hammond was staring at Clara with dawning comprehension and a glimmer of hope. Evelyn Reed's face was an unreadable mask of stone, but her fingers were clenched tightly around her pen. The other two board members looked back and forth between Clara and Damien, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. But all the oxygen in the room seemed to be consumed by Damien Sterling. His face had cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, disbelief, denial, and finally, a simmering, desperate rage. He looked from Clara to Alistair Finch, and back again, as if trying to will this absurd reality away. This is a joke, he finally choked out his voice, a hoarse whisper. This is some kind of ridiculous, pathetic joke. He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. She's a waitress. I saw her just a few weeks ago at the Gilded Sparrow. She spilled wine all over me. Clara met his frantic gaze without flinching. Yes, I was a waitress, Mr. Sterling. And yes, I spilled wine on you, after your associate knocked my arm. But you weren't interested in the details, were you? You were too busy telling me to know my place. She let that hang in the air for a moment, before turning her attention to the rest of the board. Good morning. I am Clara Prescott. For those of you who knew my father, Arthur Prescott, you know he believed this company was a family. For those of you who didn't allow me to tell you what he stood for, integrity, quality, and a fundamental respect for the people who dedicated their lives to building this enterprise. She opened her portfolio. For the past year, Mr. Sterling, as CEO, has operated under the assumption that the majority shareholder was an absentee, uninterested party. He was mistaken. Damien slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally snapping. This is outrageous, Alistair. What is the meaning of this? You cannot be serious. The heir to the Prescott fortune is a clumsy server. The heir to the Prescott fortune, Finch stated calmly, is the woman sitting at the end of this table. Her identity has been legally verified, and her 51% controlling interest is a matter of public record. She has every right to be here. Clara took control again, her voice cutting through the tension. I've spent the last several weeks not just working at the Gilded Sparrow, but also reviewing the state of my company. And what I've found is deeply disturbing. She looked directly at Damien. You're here today to present record profits, and you are to be congratulated. But at what cost? She slid a document down the table. Let's start with the V-Series handbag line, marketed as a pinnacle of American artisanal craftsmanship. Yet I have here supply chain invoices that show 80% of the components are sourced from a factory in Southeast Asia, with numerous labor complaints filed against it. Is that your definition of artisanal? Mr. Sterling, Damien sputtered. Global diversification is a standard business practice. My father had a word for it, Clara interrupted smoothly. Lying. She slid another document across the table. Let's talk about the Employee Pension Fund, restructured 6 months ago, to, and I quote from your own memo, maximize capital efficiency. The result is that this company has reduced its contribution by 60%, while our longest-serving employees will see their retirement benefits cut by nearly a third. And yet she paused, looking at Evelyn Reed. Executive bonuses have increased by 200% in the same period. Evelyn's stony facade finally cracked. She refused to meet Clara's eyes. And then Clara's voice grew softer, laced with a dangerous edge. There is the matter of the Arthur Prescott Legacy Fund, the scholarship and aid fund for our employees' families. You told a journalist in my hearing that the fund was thriving. But it's empty, isn't it, Mr. Sterling? Drained to cover marketing expenses, and according to this transfer authorization signed by you and Miss Reed, to pay for the lease on your new corporate jet. George Hammond let out a low groan, burying his face in his hands. Clara stood up, walking slowly along the side of the table, her presence commanding the room. You've taken my father's name, his company, his legacy, and you've twisted it into a hollow shell, a machine for making money that has lost its soul. You talk about cutting away sentiment as if it's a weakness. You call skilled artisans cogs in a machine. You call people like me, the people who serve your food, clean your offices, and build your products, invisible. She stopped directly behind Damien Sterling's chair, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. You told me I was insignificant, Mr. Sterling. But the funny thing about insignificant people is that there are a lot of us. And we see everything. She walked back to her seat at the head of the table. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was a physical force. Damien Sterling, for the first time in his life, looked small. Therefore, Clara said, her voice ringing with finality, as the majority shareholder of Sterling Prescott Holdings, I am exercising my authority. I am calling an immediate vote of no confidence in our current CEO. She looked at George Hammond. George. He looked up, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Aye. She looked at the 2 wavering board members, Mr. Davies, Ms. Brown. They saw the future sitting at the head of the table, and they saw the disgraced past squirming in his chair. They nodded one after the other. Aye, aye. She didn't need to look at Evelyn Reed. Finally, she looked at Damien. The motion carries. Damien, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your shares are subject to the penalty clauses in your contract regarding gross mismanagement and misrepresentation of company assets. I believe you'll find that sentiment is, indeed, a liability. Damien Sterling stared at her, his face a canvas of pure impotent fury. The man who had judged her, dismissed her, and humiliated her was now undone by her. He had been so busy looking up at the sky, he never noticed the ground beneath his feet was opening up. You can't do this," he whispered. Clara leaned forward, her voice a low, clear echo of his own words from that fateful night. "Some people are born to lead, Mr. Sterling, and some people are born to pour wine. You just spent a year proving which one you are. Now it's time for you to know your place. Get out of my company." The story of Clara Prescott and Damien Sterling isn't just about a satisfying moment of revenge. It's a powerful lesson wrapped in a real-life drama. It teaches us that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. True power lies in character, in integrity, and in the quiet dignity with which we treat others. Damien Sterling saw a waitress and dismissed her, never imagining the strength and legacy hidden beneath the surface. He learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that the person you step on today might be the one signing your termination papers tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves respect, and that karma has a way of finding even the most powerful people, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the hidden heroes and surprising twists of everyday life. Let us know in the comments, what's the best story of workplace karma you've ever witnessed? We can't wait to read your stories. Thank you for listening.